And the thing that was so hard, was the press was so brutal with him.
Hollywood, in its golden years, was a place of magic. Gorgeous stars, perfect lighting, stories that made you believe the world was beautiful. But behind every perfectly staged publicity photo, behind every contract, behind every carefully crafted smile, something else was going on entirely, and some of it was genuinely revolting. Today, we're counting down 20 disgusting Golden Age Hollywood rumors, which were actually true. Rumor 20, MGM was drugging Judy Garland. Judy Garland was 13 years old when MGM signed her without even a screen test. She was talented, she was bright, and to the studio, she was a product, and they treated her like one. From the earliest days of her contract, Garland was put on a brutal schedule, sometimes working on 2 films at the same time. She'd rehearse for one production while actively shooting another. The hours were punishing, and no amount of youthful energy could sustain that pace forever. So the studio found another solution. Studio doctors prescribed her amphetamines, called pep pills in those days, to keep her awake and functioning during marathon workdays. Then, when they needed her to sleep, they'd administer barbiturates to knock her out. After a few hours, they'd wake her, give her the pep pills again, and the whole cycle would repeat. She described this herself in interviews, recalling how she and Mickey Rooney would sometimes be working for 72 hours straight on this chemical rotation. By the time The Wizard of Oz wrapped, Judy Garland was 17 years old and already addicted. The studio also controlled what she ate. When she'd try to order a regular meal in the commissary, the kitchen had standing orders to serve her only chicken broth and black coffee. Louis B. Mayer reportedly called her his little hunchback and made cruel remarks about her appearance. The drug dependency that MGM created followed her for the rest of her life. She was fired from the studio in 1950, attempted suicide on multiple occasions, and struggled with addiction until her death from an accidental barbiturate overdose in 1969. She was just 47 years old. Rumor 19. Rock Hudson's marriage was a studio fabrication. During the 1950s, Rock Hudson was Hollywood's definition of a leading man. Tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome. Women across the country adored him, and fan magazines breathlessly reported on when this most eligible of bachelors might finally settle down. What those magazines didn't print was what virtually everyone in his professional circle already knew. Rock Hudson was gay. His real name was Roy Fitzgerald, and he'd been discovered by talent agent Henry Wilson after the war. Wilson had a reputation for building masculine stars out of young men, and he made it crystal clear from the start that Hudson's sexuality had to be buried completely. In 1955, the gossip magazine Confidential was preparing to publish an exposé on Hudson's private life. Wilson moved quickly. He offered the magazine 2 other stories in exchange, one about client Rory Calhoun's prison record, and one about Tab Hunter being arrested at a private party, and Confidential accepted the trade. But Wilson knew the danger wasn't going to disappear, so he arranged for Hudson to marry Phyllis Gates, Wilson's own secretary. The wedding happened quickly. The photos looked wonderful in the papers, and the rumors subsided. The marriage lasted 3 years. Hudson's homosexuality was confirmed publicly only after his death from AIDS-related complications in 1985. He was 59. His co-stars, including Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor, later acknowledged they had known the truth for years and quietly protected him. Elizabeth Taylor became one of the most visible early advocates for AIDS research in his memory. Rumor 18. Clark Gable fathered Loretta Young's secret child. While filming The Call of the Wild in 1935, Loretta Young became pregnant. She was unmarried. Clark Gable, her co-star, was married, and this was 1935, a time when this kind of story could destroy both of them entirely. Young was a devout Catholic and would not consider ending the pregnancy. Instead, she quietly disappeared from public life, went abroad for an extended period, gave birth, placed the baby in an orphanage in California, and then returned, as though she'd simply been on holiday. Several months later, she announced she was adopting a little girl named Judy. Hollywood's inner circle saw through the story almost immediately. The child's prominent ears were a near identical match to Clark Gable's signature feature. Young even had the girl's ears surgically pinned back in an attempt to reduce the resemblance. Gable never publicly acknowledged the child. Loretta Young maintained the adoption story for decades. The daughter, Judy, was 31 years old before she was told the full truth. In 1998, a television interview with Larry King prompted Young to finally speak more openly about what had actually happened, and later accounts suggested the encounter with Gable may not have been fully consensual. The true parentage was officially confirmed only through a memoir published after Young's death. Rumor 17. Charlie Chaplin's pattern of marrying young women. Charlie Chaplin is remembered as one of the most gifted comedians who ever lived. His screen persona, bumbling, lovable, endlessly kind, made him one of the most beloved figures on the planet. His private life told a very different story. Chaplin's first wife, Mildred Harris, was quite young when they married in 1918. He was 29. The marriage came after personal circumstances developed and fell apart within 2 years. His second wife, Lita Gray, was also considerably younger when they wed in 1924. He was 35. She had experienced complications during their relationship, and the marriage was his way of managing the situation. That union unraveled bitterly and publicly, with Lita's divorce filings detailing a catalog of behavior that caused enormous scandal. In 1936, he married 21-year-old Paulette Goddard, which was, by comparison, far less alarming. But then, in 1943, at the age of 53, he married young Una O'Neill, the daughter of celebrated playwright Eugene O'Neill. The two had met when she was quite young herself. Chaplin's final marriage to Una proved to be a lasting one. They remained together until his death in 1977 and had 8 children. But the pattern across his earlier relationships was impossible to ignore, and it was widely discussed throughout Hollywood even at the time, when the industry's standards were already far more permissive than public life would have tolerated elsewhere. Rumor 16. Errol Flynn's controversial relationships. Errol Flynn was the swashbuckling hero of a generation. He'd made Robin Hood look dashing and Captain Blood seem noble. Women swooned, and men wanted to be him. But behind the glamour of the screen, Flynn had a reputation in Hollywood circles that was considerably less romantic. In 1943, he faced serious legal allegations involving young women. The accusations were explosive, and the case became one of the biggest media spectacles of the era. Flynn's defense team worked hard to undermine the credibility of the accusers, pointing to prior relationships and what they characterized as coordinated prosecution. He was ultimately acquitted. The acquittal did not restore his reputation. The phrase "in like Flynn" entered American slang during this period, a sardonic acknowledgement of his exploits. His career never fully recovered, and he drifted into alcoholism over the following years. What made the whole thing worse was that even after the trial, the pattern didn't stop. At the courthouse itself, he allegedly met someone younger, whom he later married. And at the time of his death in 1959, at just 50 years old, Flynn was in a relationship with someone considerably younger. He had concerning modifications made to his bedroom. He was known within Hollywood as someone whose preferences ran consistently toward younger companions. None of this was much of a secret in the industry. It was simply accepted. Rumor 15. Joan Crawford's early career in pornographic films. Joan Crawford, the queen of MGM, the woman who made suffering look glamorous, the actress who won an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce, had a past she spent her entire career trying to eliminate. Born Lucille LeSueur, Crawford had worked her way up from nothing. Before Hollywood made her a star, she reportedly appeared in at least one explicit film, possibly more. Word of this circulated through industry circles for years, and at one point she was reportedly threatened with exposure. MGM's lawyers worked aggressively to suppress the material. FBI documents from the era, compiled as part of J. Edgar Hoover's habit of collecting damaging information on celebrities, reportedly referenced the films and the studio's efforts to contain the situation. A studio lawyer allegedly viewed one of the films and denied it was her, despite testimony from Crawford's former husband suggesting otherwise. Crawford never confirmed it and went to extraordinary lengths to construct a different narrative around her origins. She even obscured her birth year throughout her life, never officially confirming when she was born. The existence of the early films was never definitively proven in any court, but the FBI files and corroborating accounts from multiple sources gave the rumor a stubborn persistence that no amount of publicist management could fully extinguish. Rumor 14. Tallulah Bankhead and her absolute refusal to be quiet about any of it. Tallulah Bankhead didn't try to hide anything. That was what made her so unusual and so scandalous in an era built on carefully controlled public images. She was the daughter of a congressman, born into Alabama society, and she arrived in Hollywood with the kind of confidence that made studio executives deeply nervous. She drank heavily, used drugs openly, and had romantic relationships with both men and women at a time when any one of those facts could end a career. She spoke freely about her sexual history, reportedly accepted a film role in the 1932 production Devil and the Deep, specifically so she could sleep with co-star Gary Cooper, and said as much in an interview, substituting only the faintest euphemism. She had 4 abortions during a period when the procedure was illegal in most of the United States, and had a hysterectomy at 31. She was linked romantically to Marlene Dietrich, Greta Garbo, and Hattie McDaniel, among many others. When asked about her she declined to classify it and apparently saw no reason to. British intelligence, MI5, reportedly investigated her at various points for alleged relationships with students from Eton, raising the possibility that her behavior extended to minors in some cases, though the full details of those investigations remain classified or unavailable. Bankhead lived in a category all her own. She scandalized people for decades and wore it as though it were perfume. Rumor 13. The death of Thelma Todd was not what it appeared to be. Thelma Todd was one of the most naturally funny women in Hollywood during the early 1930s. She worked alongside Laurel and Hardy, the Marx Brothers, and Buster Keaton, and she was every bit their equal in comic timing. She had a warm screen presence and a career that seemed like it was only getting started. In December of 1935, she was found dead in a garage, slumped in her car. The cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. She was 30 years old. Authorities ruled it a suicide. The problem was that almost nobody who knew her believed it. Her personal life was busy, but not in crisis. Her professional life was thriving. She had recently opened her own restaurant and had plans both personally and professionally that suggested someone looking forward, not out. Rumors immediately pointed toward her companion and business partner, director Roland West. The whisper that followed him for the rest of his life was that they had argued violently on the night she died, and that he had locked her out of her beach cafe to punish her. If she had tried to reach the garage for warmth in the cold December night, the rest could have been accident or something else. West allegedly made a deathbed confession to having been responsible for her death, though the specifics of what he admitted have never been fully documented. No charges were ever filed. The case remained officially closed, officially a suicide, and officially unsatisfying to almost everyone who ever looked at it. Rumor 12, Lana Turner's daughter and the stabbing of Johnny Stompanato. In April of 1958, Los Angeles woke up to one of the most sensational stories the tabloids had ever had to print. Johnny Stompanato, known gangster, known associate of mobster Mickey Cohen, and the volatile boyfriend of Lana Turner, was found stabbed to death in Turner's Bel Air home. Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, confessed to the killing, saying she had done it to protect her mother from Stompanato's violence during a brutal argument. The homicide was ruled justifiable. What never fully went away was the alternate version of the story. A persistent rumor held that it was Lana Turner who had actually wielded the knife, that Cheryl had taken the blame because a jury would look more favorably on a teenage girl acting in her mother's defense than on the mother herself. Turner's performance at the subsequent inquest was described by observers as remarkably theatrical, and some who were present were struck by how composed and rehearsed her grief appeared. Another darker variation suggested Turner had walked in on Stompanato with her daughter, and that the stabbing had followed that discovery. The official verdict never changed. Cheryl Crane lived with the legal outcome for the rest of her life. She later wrote a memoir in which she maintained her account of the events. But the alternative versions continued to circulate among those who had followed the case, and the truth of exactly what happened in that Bel Air bedroom was never established beyond the official record. Rumor 11. J. Edgar Hoover used celebrity files as personal blackmail. J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI from 1924 until his death in 1972. For nearly 5 decades, he built and maintained one of the most comprehensive private intelligence operations in American history. Not always in service of the law. Hollywood was one of his particular interests. His agents collected information on actors, directors, writers, and producers throughout the Golden Age. Extramarital affairs, evidence of homosexuality, drug use, political associations, illegal activity, financial irregularities, anything that could be used as leverage. This wasn't bureaucratic record-keeping in the traditional sense. These files were personal insurance. Hoover kept them separate from official FBI channels in some cases, and used them selectively to protect himself, to punish enemies, and to ensure that no politician, not even a president, would have the appetite to remove him from his position. Many of the biggest stars of the era had files. The information was gathered through wiretapping, informants, surveillance, and the cooperation of individuals within the studios who reported back to Hoover's people. The communist-era investigations of the late 1940s and early 1950s gave the FBI enormous formal justification for being in Hollywood, and Hoover used that cover to gather far more than any political mandate required. The full scope of what those files contained has never been publicly released in its entirety. What has been released is enough to make clear that the rumor that Hoover was using celebrity dirt as a personal weapon was not a rumor at all. Rumor 10, the Ingrid Bergman affair that exiled her from Hollywood. Ingrid Bergman was one of the most admired actresses in the world. Casablanca, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Gaslight. She had the rare quality of making audiences trust her completely, and her image was irreproachable. In 1949, she wrote a letter to Italian director Roberto Rossellini telling him she admired his work and would love to collaborate. Their professional meeting became a personal affair. Bergman was married at the time to Swedish neurosurgeon Petter Lindström, with whom she had a daughter. She became pregnant by Rossellini while still legally wed to another man. The scandal that followed was of a scale almost impossible to imagine today. Senator Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado stood up on the floor of the United States Senate and denounced her as a powerful influence for evil, proposing legislation that would strip film licenses from any actor or filmmaker found guilty of moral turpitude. Fan mail that had once poured in by the thousands turned to letters of condemnation. Her career in American films effectively ceased overnight. She rushed through a divorce from Lindström, traveled to Mexico, and married Rossellini. She had 3 children with him before that marriage also ended in divorce. Bergman was eventually welcomed back into American filmmaking. She won another Academy Award in 1956 for Anastasia, but the years of exile were real, the punishment was real, and the degree to which American audiences felt personally betrayed by the affair, as though she had wronged each of them individually, was a remarkably visceral reminder of how completely stars were expected to maintain a fiction. Rumor 9. Tab Hunter's staged romance with Natalie Wood. Tab Hunter was one of Warner Brothers' biggest stars of the 1950s. Blonde, athletic, and precisely the kind of all-American face the studio wanted on their posters. What the studio also knew, and worked hard to contain, was that Hunter was gay. In 1950, Hunter had been arrested at a private party in Los Angeles attended largely by gay men. The event was reported years later by Confidential magazine, but not before Henry Wilson, Rock Hudson's agent, traded the story to the publication in exchange for Confidential killing a far more damaging piece about Hudson. Warner Brothers responded to the swirling rumors around Hunter the only way studios knew how, by manufacturing a public romance. Hunter and his co-star Natalie Wood were sent out together on highly photographed dates, award ceremonies, premieres, industry events. Fan magazines ran the couple on their covers. Hollywood insiders had their own quiet joke about it. Natalie Wood and Tab wouldn't. Hunter later confirmed all of this himself in his 2005 memoir, writing openly about his life as a closeted man during those years. While the studio was orchestrating his public image with Wood, Hunter was privately involved in a long relationship with actor Anthony Perkins. Neither relationship was what it appeared to be from the outside. It was theater, front to back, and for years it worked perfectly. Rumor 8. William Randolph Hearst had Thomas Ince killed on his yacht. In November of 1924, silent film producer Thomas Ince boarded the yacht of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst for a birthday celebration. He was 43 years old, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, and apparently in reasonable health. Within days, he was dead. The official story was that Ince suffered a heart attack aboard the yacht and was taken ashore, where he died. His body was cremated quickly. A death certificate was issued citing heart failure. What circulated in Hollywood almost immediately was something considerably more dramatic. Hearst was notoriously possessive of his companion, actress Marion Davies. The rumor held that Hearst believed Davies was romantically involved with Charlie Chaplin, who was also aboard the yacht. In a jealous rage, Hearst went looking for Chaplin, and finding the wrong man in a darkened corridor, shot Thomas Ince by mistake. The front page of the Los Angeles Times Morning Edition ran the headline, "Movie producer shot on Hearst yacht," which vanished by the evening edition. Key guests aboard the yacht, including Chaplin himself, initially denied having been present at all, which was easily disproven. Chaplin's valet claimed to have seen Ince removed from the vessel bleeding from a head wound. Luella Parsons, a gossip columnist who was aboard that night, received a lifetime contract with Hearst's newspaper empire shortly afterward. No thorough investigation was ever conducted. The San Diego district attorney closed the matter quickly after hearing from a single Hearst-employed witness. No one was ever charged. Whether Ince died of heart failure or something else entirely, the behavior of everyone involved ensured the story would never fully be put to rest. Rumor 7. The studios arranged fake romantic relationships between stars. It sounds like the kind of thing a cynical person would say to spoil the magic, but it was simply standard practice throughout the Golden Age. Studios had complete control over their contract players in ways that extended far beyond what they could film and what roles they would take. They controlled public image. They controlled press access. And when a star's personal life created a marketing problem, being gay, being involved in an unsuitable relationship, being perceived as boring or threatening, the studio's publicity department invented a solution. Arranged dates between stars were photographed and distributed to fan magazines. False engagements were announced. Manufactured romances between two contract players, neither of whom had any personal interest in the other, were played out across months of carefully staged public appearances, because both of their images benefited from the association. Rock Hudson's relationship management was one of the most elaborate examples, but it was far from unique. Tab Hunter was paired publicly with Natalie Wood during the same period when he was being investigated for attending a private party of gay men. Studios calculated that a highly publicized relationship with a popular actress would counteract the potential damage. The actors themselves often had little say. They signed contracts that gave studios enormous authority over their time, their public behavior, and their image. Refusing to cooperate with a publicity arrangement could result in suspension, reassignment to lesser projects, or the end of studio support entirely. It was theater, the most controlled kind, and audiences had no idea. Rumor 6. Joan Bennett's husband shot her agent in the groin. This one is almost too strange to believe, but it is entirely documented. Joan Bennett was a successful actress who in 1941 married Walter Wanger, the film producer who had worked on some of Hollywood's most significant productions, including Stagecoach. By all appearances, they were a successful Hollywood couple. In December of 1951, Wanger was watching from his car in a parking lot outside MCA's offices as his wife said goodbye to her agent, Jennings Lang. Whatever he saw, or believed he saw, convinced him that something was going on between them. He got out of the car, drew a pistol, and shot Lang twice. Both shots struck Lang in the groin area. Lang survived. Wanger was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 4 months in a minimum security prison. He served his time and returned to film production, going on to produce Cleopatra in 1963. Joan Bennett's career did not recover so easily. The scandal attached itself to her name in a way that no amount of time seemed to diminish. The work dried up steadily, and the career she had built over decades contracted significantly in the years that followed. She and Wanger divorced in 1965. Lang continued working in the industry, and the incident remained one of the more singular acts of violence in Hollywood's long history of colorful personal behavior. Rumor 5. The studios forced abortions on their contract players. The language studios used was always softer than the reality. A star needed to take time to rest. She was temporarily unavailable for filming. She needed to address some personal matters. What actually happened in a significant number of documented cases was that the studio pressured, coerced, or outright arranged for a contract actress to terminate a pregnancy because a visible pregnancy would disrupt a production schedule, damage a carefully managed image, or compromise a studio's financial investment in a star's romantic appeal. Judy Garland was reportedly pressured into an abortion by both studio executives and her own mother. She was not the only one. The studio era's power over contract players was nearly absolute. If an actress refused to comply, she risked suspension, replacement, and the kind of professional isolation that could effectively end a career. The financial leverage studios held, In an era before agents had significant power and long before any industry unions could meaningfully protect individual performers, made it exceedingly difficult to say no to anything the studio considered essential to business. Many of these situations were kept secret at the time and only became known through autobiographies and investigative journalism conducted decades later, long after the women involved had died or reached old age. Rumor 4. Peg Entwistle actually jumped from the Hollywood sign. In September of 1932, a hiker near the hills above Los Angeles came across a jacket, a shoe, and a purse near one of the letters of the famous Hollywoodland sign, as it was spelled at the time. A note was inside the purse. A short distance below, the hiker found a body. It was Peg Entwistle, a 24-year-old British actress who had come to Hollywood with genuine talent and legitimate stage credits and had found the transition to film considerably harder than expected. She had appeared in only one film by that point. She climbed the 50-foot letter H of the sign and jumped. The tragedy itself was confirmed almost immediately. What made the story take on additional, almost unbearable irony was what arrived in the mail at the house where she had been staying just days after her death. It was a letter from the Bliss Hayden School of Acting, offering her a leading role in a new production. The character she had been cast to play was a woman who kills herself. The Hollywood sign has carried a somewhat darker reputation ever since. Several other deaths and tragedies have been associated with the area over the years, but Entwistle's remains the most remembered. The young actress who came to Hollywood looking for something and found only disappointment steep enough to be fatal. Rumor 3. Charlie Chaplin was banned from returning to the United States. Charlie Chaplin left the United States in September of 1952 to attend the London premiere of his film Limelight. He had lived in America for 4 decades. He had built his entire career there. He had no plans that didn't eventually circle back. While he was on the ship crossing the Atlantic, the U.S. Attorney General James McGranary revoked his re-entry permit. The official justification was moral and political. Chaplin had long attracted the suspicion of conservative politicians and the FBI, particularly J. Edgar Hoover, who viewed him as a communist sympathizer. Chaplin had never taken out American citizenship despite his decades in the country, and he had made films and public statements that were read by some as politically problematic. There were also the personal scandals, his marriages to teenage girls, and the paternity suit filed by actress Joan Barry in the early 1940s, which had become a tabloid spectacle, even though Chaplin was ultimately cleared of the criminal charges. McGranary's ban gave the simmering resentment an official form. Chaplin never returned. He settled in Switzerland with Una and their children, formally surrendered his American re-entry permit in 1953, and lived the rest of his life in Europe. He received an honorary Academy Award in 1972 and returned briefly for the ceremony, the only time he set foot on American soil after the ban, and was given a 12-minute standing ovation. He died in 1977. He was 88 years old. Rumor 2, the death of George Reeves was never fully explained. In June of 1959, George Reeves, best known to millions of American families as the first man to play Superman on television, was found dead of a gunshot wound in his bedroom. The official ruling was suicide. Reeves had struggled to find work after the Superman series ended. The role had been enormously popular, but it had also trapped him, making it difficult for audiences and casting directors to see him as anything else. He was 45 years old, professionally frustrated, and reportedly depressed. The suicide ruling should have been straightforward. What complicated it was the physical evidence. The gun was found on the floor some distance from the body. No fingerprints were recovered from it. No gunpowder residue was found on Reeves's hands, and witnesses who were present in the house that night reported hearing only one shot. Yet investigators later found 2 additional bullets embedded in the bedroom floor, all fired from the same weapon. Suspicion pointed toward his former lover, Toni Mannix, the wife of powerful MGM general manager Eddie Mannix. When Reeves ended the years-long affair to become engaged to another woman, strange events had apparently followed. Harassing phone calls, a suspicious incident involving his vehicle. Eddie Mannix himself was a man with well-documented connections to people who solved problems outside the law. No charges were ever filed. The investigation was not extensive. The case was closed, but Reeves's co-star Noel Neill, who had seen him just 2 days before his death, described him as full of life, talking about future projects and an upcoming trip to Australia. His friend Rory Calhoun put it plainly at the time, no one in Hollywood believed the suicide story. Rumor 1. Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich had an affair, and then both denied they'd ever met. Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich were the two greatest European-born stars of Hollywood's golden age. Both had arrived in America around the same time. Both were nominated for Academy Awards in the 1930s. Both were considered among the most beautiful women who had ever appeared on screen, and for decades, both of them maintained, with complete conviction, that they had never met. The problem with that claim was a 1925 silent German film called The Joyless Street. Garbo appeared in it as a 19-year-old in one of her earliest film roles. Film historians and archivists have long believed that Dietrich also appeared in the film as a background player. Dietrich consistently and emphatically denied this. The film is now incomplete. No full print survives, which made definitive verification difficult. However, film historian and author Diana McClellan studied the surviving footage extensively and, using archival photographs for comparison, concluded with considerable confidence that Dietrich appears in several scenes alongside Garbo. The two women's determined denial that they had ever met was widely understood within Hollywood circles as an attempt to suppress rumors of a romantic relationship. Both had reputations for relationships with women, and their simultaneous insistence that they were strangers to one another struck many observers at the time and since as the kind of denial that reveals more than silence would have. The golden age of Hollywood gave us some of the most beautiful films ever made. It gave us faces and voices we've never forgotten, but it was also a place where power was absolute, where secrets were currency, and where the distance between a star's public image and their actual life could span entire oceans. These weren't whispers invented by gossip columnists. These were things that really happened to real people, often to people with very little ability to refuse. If you found this video worth watching, please hit the like button and subscribe. There's a great deal more history waiting to be told, and we'll be right here to tell it.